Hello again, traveller. We fluffed the pillows, we dimmed the lantern, and you asked for a longer stroll. So let's loosen our boots and walk slowly through the drowsy side streets of order. Take a soft breath with me, in and out. Good. Tonight we are not here for thunder or trumpets. We are here for the quiet comedy of rules. The tiny fences humans build around chaos so they can sleep without feeling teeth at the door. This is not a march. It is a mosey. And you may giggle a little because sometimes a fence is just tall enough to trip over. Tiny favor before we begin. Only if it doesn't wake your thumb. If this sort of warm, gently ridiculous history helps you drift, tap the like button and whisper in the comments where you're listening from and what time the clock thinks it is. I like to imagine a star map of sleepy screens. Cadiz at 2307, Konya at 0112, Mar del Plata at 1842, and a stray insomniac in Reykjavik bargaining with the sun. All right, blanket tucked, shoulder relaxed. Let's go visit the places where rules are rules, even when the rules are delightfully silly. We start as promised in a courtroom with a snout at the bar. The hall is stone and chilly, the rushes are confident, and the candles have a committee about dripping which they are currently ignoring. At the center stands a wooden pen. Inside it, a pig. Not a particularly guilty-looking pig, just one with the untroubled face of a creature who understands mud and doesn't understand Latin. The charge, as the clerk intones, is a bouquet, public mischief, vegetable vandalism, the trampling of 2 respectable hats, and the alarming of a goose. Witnesses swear solemnly, and one old man points at the defendant with a finger that has carved wood for 50 years. The pig snuffles. Somewhere in the gallery, a child gasps as if justice itself had just looked back. It is very easy from our soft mattresses to laugh at this, but the court is not being foolish. It is being thorough. If the law is a blanket, it must cover everything that keeps you awake. Wind, rumor, war, and yes, the sow in your cabbage. The judge speaks in a tone you would use to comfort a horse. A legal proxy is appointed for the pig, who through no fault of her own, fails to contribute to her own defense. The proxy says important words like proportionality and custom, and the scribe writes them down with the grim joy of a man who loves vowels. No one expects the pig to pay a fine. What the town expects is proof that chaos can be sung back into key by people with hats. When the verdict comes, the relief in the room smells faintly of wax and confidence. Breathe. The door opens, and we step into a crisp alley, carried on the back of the wind. It smells like wood smoke and turnips in conversation. A boy whistles 4 dancing notes, and a beetle swivels as if pulled by string. No whistling, the beetle says. Not here, not after sundown, not along the stretch from the Guild Bakery to the tax office, unless the whistler is performing a tune recognized by the council as uplifting but unlikely to incite a frolic. Is that written anywhere? Probably. Does everyone know it? Absolutely. The law is a quilt, stitched by memory more than ink. Whistling brings attention. Attention brings clusters. Clusters bring grievances that remember themselves. And then the fire decides it would like to see new roofs. Modern you says absurd. Medieval everyone says, I like my street the way it is. Our feet carry us toward a workshop where a carpenter labors shirtlessly, pantslessly and shamelessly, producing a table that could survive being mistaken for a bridge. It's about the glue, he explains to no one in particular. Sleeves and glue are natural enemies. Above his door a small sign reads, Wood is fragile. Modesty optional. Across the lane a neighbor with her hair tied in a knot sharp enough to cut butter composes a letter to the council that begins, whereas certain persons. Rules of decency wobble from city to city, sometimes explicit, sometimes enforced by eyebrows, but the result is the same. Eventually a herald will read a proclamation about aprons, and everyone will nod as if they were always in favor of aprons. You can giggle. Civilization can be a meeting about trousers. We obey the wheeled rhythm of a cart and follow it into the market square. Brass weights gleam like tiny planets cupped in an inspector's hand. He is not only measuring onions, he is measuring trust. A pound is not merely a weight here. It is a public promise. Many tricks are famous and therefore no longer tricks. Some stallholders soak their measure sticks in oil, so the grain clings in a flattering way. Others blacken the inside of a cup, so customers cannot see the generous slope at the bottom. The inspector disapproves evenly at everyone. He does not want punishment so much as he wants sameness. People can nap when sameness is in season. Next door, the apothecary performs careful theatre. His shelves are a parable in Latin: Angelica, Valeriana, Melissa, and a bottle labelled Sleep in a handwriting that looks like it would apologize for spilling. Another shelf bears jars that are emphatically not poisons, a sign which, if we are honest, only makes a person think about poisons. The law visits here more often than elsewhere, not because the apothecary is a villain, but because knowledge is a blade that remembers both edges. The city's compromise is supervision. "We will see your receipt," say the wardens. "We will see your faces," says the apothecary in return. No one admits that they are also negotiating fear. Fear that a cure could become a rumor. Fear that a rumor could become a rope. A cat-eyed cat patrols along the windowsill with the practiced assurance of a retired admiral. Her name, according to the baker's boy, is Mistress Flower. She does not care about statutes, and yet her life is better because they exist. Fewer rats, fewer fires, fewer explosions caused by enthusiastic recipes. She stretches, perfectly indifferent to the city's nightly argument with itself about the difference between order and peace. If the cat is content, perhaps the laws are purring too. Turn your head. Listen to the clink of a nail hammered into wood. On the church door, someone has posted a schedule of holiness long enough to beat rugs with. It lists when bells will be rung, when fasts will be announced, when hymns will be sung about the fasts and bells, and the fines for getting any of this wrong. You could laugh, or you could be moved. Schedules are a way for a community to agree on time when the sky refuses to be punctual. If the bell says it is Wednesday, then it is Wednesday enough for market prices, and that is a kindness. The notice is a net thrown across a slippery week. We keep ambling and the city keeps speaking in little notices. A small board near the well says, "No washing entrails in this water, under pain of public scolding, by 3 matrons chosen by lot." Another, "Anyone who brings a donkey onto the bridge without a hat shall be fined 2 farthings unless the donkey bites." We do not question this. It is clearly written by people who have met donkeys. The well rule is serious. Water is everyone's body. The bridge rule is cultural. Hats imply seriousness and bridges require it. A donkey in a hat is not simply dressed. It is participating in civic dignity. Also, the hat keeps the flies off. Sometimes the sensible and the symbolic overlap so neatly, you cannot find the seam. We stop at the mill. The wheel is patient, the river is gossip, and the miller is everyone's favorite suspect. That is not because the miller is wicked. It is because he stands between grain and bread, and any man who stands between hunger and its answer will eventually be accused of inventing new math. The law says the miller may take a toll, 1 measure in so many, 1 handful in such and such. The villagers say the miller's hand is larger on Thursdays. The miller sighs and points to a wooden scoop burned with a careful mark. The mark is the town's promise that the scoop is honest. This is really a story about measuring people, not grain. When the scoop is public, anger does not multiply. You can fall asleep near a public scoop. Night slides toward us with leather soles. A bellman walks the lanes with a lantern and a staff, announcing curfew with a voice like a blanket. Curfew is not a punishment. It is a lullaby that doubles as fire prevention. After a certain hour, no flames should go wandering, and neither should songs. Of course there are exceptions. Midwives traveling on urgent business, bakers tending kindness in ovens, a scribe hurrying to fix a spelling mistake before the dawn mocks it. The bellman knows who is permitted and who must be questioned. He does not prowl, he glides. People sleep better when they know the shape of the night. Taverns negotiate with silence. Closing hours are posted like truce terms. "Are late to be served until the prayer before the last prayer," says a sign that somehow makes sense on Thursdays. There is a designated lane for singing between sunset and the time when moths grow bold, and anyone caught singing outside that lane must sing again later in a place chosen by the council. This is either a punishment or a festival depending on the singer. If a brawl breaks out, the host is fined a sum equal to the loss of 3 stools and a mop, which is probably the legal unit for consequences. These may sound like jokes, but the tavern is where temperature is taken. If the town's quarrels get too warm, the fire finds new fuel. On market days, the ale tasters make their rounds. Picture an official whose job is to sip and furrow his brow scientifically. He does not drink for pleasure. That is officially forbidden, which is officially hilarious. He drinks for balance and safety. Bad ale is a public hazard in a world where water can be an adventure. And here is the secret. By placing pleasure under a badge, the town teaches the badge to respect pleasure. Control that never tastes what it governs becomes cruel. Control that sips becomes kinder. The ale taster, therefore, is a philosopher with foam on his lip. We cross a lane where the air smells of leather and listening. The cobblers debate the standard length of a foot. This would be easier if feet agreed with one another. A council of shoemakers proposes a town last, a wooden model foot that all shoes must politely resemble. The argument is loud and loving. "If we set it too long," says one, "our children will slap pavement like geese." "If we set it too short," says another, "no soldier will forgive us." Meanwhile, a boy outside traces his own foot with chalk and decides to grow slowly to preserve the argument. Standards are not only for objects. They are songs we rehearse together until we trust them. Someone has posted an ordinance about geese. Of course there is an ordinance about geese. It says in essence that if a goose attempts to collect tolls on the bridge, you may not pay the goose even if the goose hisses convincingly. All tolls must be paid to a human in a hat. You laugh, but a rule that is ridiculous in content can be wise in intention. It tries to say, we will be one people with one purse. The river will not charge 2 prices in the same afternoon. Consistency is how a town smiles at its own reflection. Sumptuary laws creep in like moths toward candles. The council worries that everyone wants to be everyone else, and that soon even the cats will wear silk. They declare that velvet may be worn by no one who cannot afford to forget what velvet is called. This sounds petty, but the fear underneath is the collapse of signals. If everyone looks rich, who is obliged to be generous? Medieval solutions to modern anxieties are often fashion shows with fines. Again, the intention is sleep. A world where roles are legible lets people rest between them. We from our softer era mutter about expression. They from theirs murmur about comprehension. There are bathing rules posted tastefully outside the bathhouse. No splashing that may be interpreted as politics. No hats in the pool unless the wearer is a donkey and the hat is medically required. Do not bring fish to teach them about water. You can feel the community smiling at itself through these notices. Baths are where the town goes to become human again. The rules let that humanness be predictable. Privacy is not guaranteed by architecture so much as by choreography. If everyone stares at the ceiling at polite moments, privacy happens by consensus. Many medieval rules are like that. Agreements about where to look and when to agree not to see. At the edge of town, a fairground waits for permission to bloom. The charter is an accordion of parchment that expands to reveal promises and shrinks to fit into a pocket of authority. We read that jongleurs may juggle only items that will not cause a writ if dropped, that wrestlers may wrestle within a circle that will be swept afterward by someone who believes in circles, that fortune-tellers must include an asterisk noting the speculative nature of fortune. These are not simply jokes. A fair is a rehearsal for trust among strangers. The rules are the tent pegs that keep the sky from falling when you hang new colors on it. Down by the river, a set of laws regulates boats, nets, and gossip. No net shall be cast within so many steps of the bridge except by those who will share the first catch with the bridge. No boat shall race another boat on Sundays unless both boats agree to lose. No man shall shout salmon if he has only seen a stick with ambitions. Water multiplies rumors. The town lets the river flow through the rule book, so that when someone falls in, rescue is practiced rather than improvised. Improvisation is for music. Rescue is for lists. A notice about pigs, because we began with a pig, states that any pig that wanders while wearing bells must be assumed to be a philosopher and guided back gently. Bells on pigs are a compromise between the pig's plans and the world's. They make a hog into a topic sentence. The sound says, I am here. Plan accordingly. The rule says, we hear you. We will. Community is the echo that decides to be kind. Let us pause on a bench. Somewhere a baker yawns into flour and the sack sighs back. Bakers live with laws like sailors live with wind. Bread is priced with a mathematical tenderness that would scare a general. If grain is dear, loaves grow small but the price stands still. If grain is cheap, loaves swell with civic generosity. The baker's book is a poem. Today the loaf shall weigh as much as an honest apple. Inspectors weigh the bread as if it were a crown. This is not dramatics. It is a ritual of stomachs. A town that keeps bread predictable gives parents an extra hour of courage each night. Plague once taught the city to speak slowly. You can feel it lingering in certain ordinances, the ones about cordons, about visitors who must spend a day in the company of a pleasant boredom before entering, about how to count to 14 without insulting anyone. If a man sneezes thrice, reads one anxious law, he must bless himself and be blessed by the nearest window. The window part has been criticized by scholars for centuries and adored by windows for even longer. Fear organizes itself into kindness when someone writes a list that begins, we will take care of each other by doing these small, silly things. The watchwords change nightly. The bellman whispers them to those who need them, 2 words sewn together by common sense. Copper candle, quiet gate, river patience. The words must be easy to murmur but hard to guess, like secrets told to soup. Guards salute the password because it represents an invisible rope tied around everyone's waist, pulling them home if they wander too far into the dark. If a stranger gives the wrong word in the wrong mouth, the night clears its throat and a lantern appears. Suspicion is polite at first. If suspicion must be rude, it apologizes later. The rules insist on this. The apology is part of the law. A whole book exists about bells. It defines who may ring which bell and for how many heartbeats, and it contains a paragraph about the precise speed at which a bell may be rung when announcing that no one should worry. This is not obsessive. It is merciful. Panic has its own acoustics, and bells can accidentally sing that song if they are careless. When the bell says all is well, it must do so with the voice of a grandmother who has already checked twice. You sleep when you believe her. The grammar of proclamations is a genre. Town criers rehearse vowels the way barbers rehearse gossip. A misplaced comma has led armies astray, and everyone remembers the time no geese near market became no geese near market, which created a holiday of unprecedented honking. So the crier practices until the words fall onto the stones with the right weight. He stands at intersections, where the town's attention naturally braids itself and pours the words into the braid. By order of the council. The phrase is a lullaby with consonants. Festival rules are filled with affection disguised as sternness. Fire breathers must breathe fire only in directions that do not presently contain people. If a mask frightens a child, the mask must apologize. Confetti may be thrown upward only. Downward confetti is a tax. The point is not control for its own sake. The point is to protect joy, which is fragile when it is shared. You can feel the council trying to keep delight from becoming accident. If everyone understands where delight is permitted to run, it runs farther. Some rules fail gloriously. They famous attempt to outlaw silence during sermons, on the grounds that silence allowed sleeping, produced a congregation that hummed like bees. Another ordinance tried to restrict public sighing to after sundown, which resulted in a black market for early afternoon exhalations. Failure teaches the council to frame desires as permissions rather than prohibitions. You may nap from these hours to those works better than do not be a person. The lesson recurs across centuries. Rules are happiest when they describe a dance step instead of banning a foot. We wander past the scribe's quarter. Copyists argue in a whisper about handwriting that looks like a spider skating. They maintain a correction ritual involving a candle, a stern glance, and a prayer to the patron of commas. A mistake in a charter can make a river bend the wrong way or make a widow married to a bridge. The law forgives certain errors, if they are made humbly and corrected musically, and punishes others, if they are made loudly and corrected never. The scribe's job is to keep the town married to the right people and the river in its own bed. This is higher romance than it looks. Beggars are licensed, not because the town wants to count sorrows, but because counting becomes care if you write it down kindly. A badge says, "We see you. We will not chase you like a sparrow." The badge also says, "We know who you are if you are ill," which is a long way of saying, "You will not be alone." Rules can be cruel if they brag. They can be blankets if they whisper. The best whispers are made of tin and tied to a cord. Now the Guild of Candlemakers calls another meeting. Minutes are taken by a man whose handwriting looks like a procession of chairs. They debate wick width, tallow proportion, and the legal definition of stubborn flame. The definitions matter because night arrives daily, and everyone owns at least one timid corner. They agree to test a new wick honorably by asking it to light 6 rooms and 1 fear. The resolution passes, cheerfully. Civilization is sometimes nothing more than people agreeing that a flame can be trained with adjectives. Return to the alley of our whistler. The boy has grown into a man and learned to whistle only in kitchens. The beadle has retired and now glares at sunsets recreationally. The rule about whistling persists with gentle edits. Holiday afternoons are exempt. Wedding mornings may include approved tunes at approved volumes. Morning days require whistling to be what the council calls respectfully cheerful, which is impossible, and therefore no one whistles. You can feel the town learning to flex without breaking. The rule remains as a shape around a memory. That is what many rules are, embroidered outlines of the moment when fear and laughter decided to sit in the same chair. Before we drowse, let us inventory the tiny promises we have seen. A pig gets a trial so that a town can prove to itself that words reach even into mud. A ban on whistling becomes a bedtime story about fires that did not happen. A carpenter is invited to consider aprons, so glue does not become fashion. Markets weigh honesty and find it exactly £1. Apothecaries bottle comfort with labels that fear cannot read. Bridges demand hats from donkeys, so that people remember to respect crossings. Mills display scoops that are the same on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Bells practice saying "it is all right" until the words learn to mean it. Taverns rehearse last calls as if they were hymns. Fairs juggle safely, so strangers can become neighbors. Geese fail to collect tolls with great dignity. Shoes learn to be feet without making feet. Learn to be shoes. Bread keeps its promises even when grain tells lies. Passwords whisper the shape of belonging. Scribes apologize on behalf of commas. Festivals choreograph delight, and the Guild of Candlemakers believes in reforming difficult candles. If all that is not a lullaby, then lullabies need to reconsider their competition. You might argue that these rules are ridiculous. They are. And also they are love. They say, we will keep each other from the edge by drawing a small line here and another there, and then laughing at the shape until the shape looks like a smile. Communities that cannot afford chaos hire humor as a night watchman. There is a darker corridor ahead, yes. Rooms where jars wear different labels at midnight. Halls where loyalty sharpens itself into something that gleams. Chapters in which the blanket of rules tightens. Until breathing becomes an art you must ask permission to practice. We will go there later, because the night is long and stories like company. But not yet. For now, let the harmless face of order watch over your pillow. The pig who did not understand the verdict but helped a town sleep. The boy who learned to whistle where it would not sound like danger. The carpenter who eventually bought an apron as a birthday present to propriety. The inspector who polished his weights as if polishing trust. The apothecary who sold cloves and caution in equal measure. The cat who didn't read the ordinances but obeyed the nap. The bridge that collected hats. The mill that measured suspicion gently, until suspicion forgot itself. The bell that found the exact tone for enough for tonight. The tavern that asked laughter to go home with dignity. The fair that left the meadow cleaner than it found it. The shoemakers who tuned feet to the city's tempo. The bakers who proofed dough and promises. The watchwords that were nests for names. The scribe who corrected the universe one comma at a time. The festival that threw confetti upwards so hope would come back down. And the candle makers who decided that even stubborn flames deserve patient teachers. Sleep with those images arranging themselves on a shelf inside you. When we continue, we will visit rooms where the jars are labeled more ominously, where a cup of wine can become a trial, where loyalty is measured with metal, and where myths learn to walk in armor. But that is for the next stretch of night. For this one, be cozy in the knowledge that our ancestors built a soft wall against the dark out of notices, scoops, bells, hats, aprons, and laughter, and that the wall worked often enough to be worth remembering. Hello again, traveller. We have walked the cheerful edge of order, the side that smells like bread and committees, and now the corridor bends. The lantern flame is smaller here on purpose. We will keep our pace gentle, our footsteps quiet, and our humor close at hand, because nothing turns brittle faster than laughter in a room that takes itself too seriously. Breathe in, breathe out. Let the air move through you like a long, slow bell. We are going to talk about poison, not to alarm you, but to watch how fear tries to pick up a quill and write laws faster than the heart can beat. Picture a table lit by a disciplined candle. The candle burns with the attitude of a clerk, all clarity and no personality. Beside it sits a cup that would like to pass as innocent. The cup is glazed to look honest, thick lip, plain belly, no painted stories about kings catching fish with golden nets. Tonight the cup is wine and friendship, and a reason to speak softly. And also maybe the cup is a test. Medieval cities did not drink fear in big gulps. They sipped it, then debated the flavor. Was it the taste of cloves or of power? Did the paranoia come from the grape or the rumor vine? Someone takes a drink, pauses, and does not fall dramatically to the floor. Still, a draught passes under the door, and the room collectively adjusts its seat on the bench of certainty. If a town were a body, the apothecary would be the liver, and the gossip would be the bloodstream. Remedies and rumors both circulate, and both need filtering. We approach the apothecary's shop again, but this is the midnight version, when shadows label themselves and jars hum their Latin under their breath. The door opens to a little bell that rings in a moral register. Inside shelves, on them, glass containers with corks that are more promise than technology. Angelica for stomachs, valeriana for nerves, vinegar of 4 thieves for courage that prefers an odor. In the back, the caution shelf. It does not say poison. It says antidote, which is a linguistic mirror that makes every jar look like a hero. The apothecary keeps books, one for ingredients, one for purchases guarded by initials, and a small private book for what he calls correspondences, by which he means the ways herbs talk to each other when steeped together like neighbors in a bath. The city's response to the idea of poison is a choreography of eyes. The council passes rules that read like prayers against improvisation. Physicians shall sign, and apothecaries shall seal, and witnesses shall witness that the seal was sealed by someone who looks like they use seals responsibly. These rules do not assume that everyone is wicked. They assume that fear is a flamboyant liar. Supervision becomes a kind of communal exorcism. If enough people watch, the demon of suspicion grows bored and leaves to bother a different city. That is the theory. The practice, of course, is that watching produces theatre, and theatre attracts audiences, and audiences attract actors with motives. Let me introduce you to a man we will call the cupbearer. Though he answers to any title that lets him enter a room with a tray, he has trained his hands to be small and steady. He can carry 6 goblets without letting their reflections quarrel. In another world, he would be a harpist. In this one, he is a professional reassurance. Important people hire him not for the wine, but for the ritual that surrounds it. The measured pour, the gentle turn, the respectful taste he takes before offering the drink to his employer. The taste is not large. That would be wasteful. The taste is symbolic, and symbolism, as we know, is a form of law in rooms where law dresses in silk. When the cupbearer drinks, the guests breathe easier. When he does not, conversation moves into a tense key and stays there until someone sneezes dramatically and declares an allergy to cinnamon. Poison, the idea of poison, is a social technology, and medieval society is very modern in its use of it. Most murders then as now involve impatience rather than cleverness. Yet the threat of a quiet death fascinates the anxious and empowers the timid. Give a rumor a tincture, and it becomes contagious. The council makes more rules. A popular one. No person shall sell arsenic within the city walls unless they are visibly using it for rats, and not for the sort of rats that wear rings. An unpopular one. Wines served at official banquets must be decanted in the presence of 3 honest men, or 2 honest men and 1 woman who glares appropriately. You can hear the nervous laughter in the margins. You can also hear the scribes arguing about how to define appropriate glare in case law. We walk now toward a kitchen the size of a small battlefield. Kitchens in grand houses are campaigns that last all day. There are pots like round shields, and fires that must be negotiated with diplomacy and tongs. The cook is a general who can recite the treaty between garlic and milk by heart. On a night when important tongues will taste important sauces, the kitchen is also a fortress. Locks on pantry doors, seals on spice jars. A rule that no dish may travel unaccompanied, as if food were a nervous nobleman with a talent for wandering. The taster is summoned, not the cupbearer this time, but the master of safety, who eats a spoonful of each thing while mumbling pleasantly about texture. He smiles and survives. A sigh moves through the staff like a breeze through flags. Sometimes, however, the breeze is just a rehearsal for a storm. Someone comes in late, or someone leaves early, or someone speaks to someone they should not speak to near the pantry door. It is nothing. It is everything. The head of household composes an internal memorandum that sounds like law because fear prefers statutes. Henceforth all servants shall tie their sleeves with a knot that only we use, so that no outsider may tie a sleeve and pass as one of us. It is very clever and also very dumb. Outsiders can learn knots. What the rule actually does is give fear something to check with its fingers. Fear is tactile that way, but now the sleeves are tied and the sauce is safe, and the house can eat without constantly glancing at the door as if hunger were trying to get in from the wrong direction. Let's step out into the city again and watch panic learn how to ride a horse. News gallops. A rumor that a minor duke in a neighboring town was briefly unwell makes the journey in half the time the duke takes to recover. By the time the rumor arrives, the duke is dead, resurrected, poisoned again, and engaged to a bottle of vinegar. The market stalls adjust their prices in tiny, polite ways. Cinnamon grows cautious. Cloves become proud. The apothecary gets customers who stare too hard at their own tongues and ask whether red is the normal color for certainty. The city's chief magistrate writes a sober announcement about unhelpful speculation. This is the exact spell that causes speculation to feel helpful. You can sympathize. The magistrate does not want silence. He wants sober voices. But sober voices are not colorful. and colour is what roomers wear when they want to be invited in for dinner. The church, meanwhile, has its own wise grammar for fear. A sermon might praise prudence, while gently mocking the arrogance of those who imagine themselves important enough to be poisoned. If you wish to be killed in a sophisticated fashion, the preacher says, smiling, you must first be sophisticated. The laughter is medicinal. The moral is practical. Most danger arrives by cart, not by crystal. The truly devout combat poison by washing their hands and their lettuce, and by avoiding unlabeled jars with snakes embossed on them. An ordinance soon follows. Jars with snakes embossed on them must be pre-approved by the Council's Committee on Decorative Honesty. The committee meets on Thursdays, wears sober hats, and gives the city a new phrase on snake-approved. It becomes an adjective, as in, is that bridge snake-approved? No, and it should not be. In palaces, fear has better costuming. The corridors are long enough to let whispers stretch their legs. Fair monarch, king, queen, doge, countess with a taste for velvet. A monarch learns to drink as an actor drinks, to the audience and not from the stage. The cupbearer performs, the taster survives, and the monarch compliments the vintage in a tone that says, I control what is being drunk here, which is the point. Control is theatre and theatre is control. It works until it doesn't. A boy coughs at the wrong moment. A courtier goes pale because her shoe is too tight. Someone drops a spoon, and metal on stone becomes the sound of mortality. You can see why people prefer to sleep through these dinners, because paranoia is as contagious as yawning. A secondary market appears overnight, the business of antidotes. Some are reputable, careful mixtures of herbs that soothe the gut after a night of questionable conviviality. Some are desperate, unicorn horn shavings that once belonged to a goat who had opinions about branding. The apothecary sells a practical one labelled after supper. Comfort, because it is illegal to call anything anti-poison, unless it has been tested on at least 3 officials and 1 rooster, who volunteers bravely. The rooster law was written as a joke, but no one wants to repeal it in case the rooster lobby is real. The legal imagination grows fertile. We read of tests conducted with rings that change color near corruption, or with spoons carved from certain woods that prefer to float when honor is present. Everyone agrees on the spectacle and disagrees on the results. A contemporary manual advises setting an amethyst stone near wine as a talisman, which is a little like asking a polite purple rock to take the first sip. Amulets bloom. If a charm is dramatic, it soothes the nervous because drama is a way to see your fear dance outside you. If a charm is small, it soothes the practical, because small things are easy to carry. The laws rarely forbid charms outright. Instead, they regulate the claims that charms may make in the marketplace of promises. A charm may not guarantee that enemies shall fall downstairs, says one statute. It may only say that the wearer will remember to hold the railing. We arrive at a trial. Not the pigs this time, but a humans. Someone accused not necessarily of poisoning, but of arranging an atmosphere in which poisoning could have happened. That is not a crime on paper. It is a crime in the heart, and hearts lecture loudly when scared. The court hears testimony about glances exchanged during supper, about how the accused touched the bottle's neck as if it were a harp, about how a certain song was sung in a minor key. The judge is a realistic person who knows that motive is a noisy bird and opportunity is a hole in the fence. He wants evidence that can be weighed. A physician testifies with dignity about stomach contents and the ethical challenges of timing nausea with a sundial. The scribe writes everything, including the parts the law cannot digest. In the end, the verdict barely matters. What matters is that the community has created a story in which it is still possible to tell good from bad. That story is what lets people go home and pretend to sleep. We drift down to the docks, where barrels are as suspicious as orchids. Sailors believe in 2 things, rope and the rumors that climb it. A customs officer wearing an expression like a locked box inspects imported spices with a care more dramatic than essential. We must prevent mischief, he intones, and Mischief, hearing its name, peeks over the edge of a crate. He uses a long needle to pierce a barrel and smell the knowledge inside. If he smells wine, he nods. If he smells vinegar pretending to be wine, he sighs and impounds the barrel until the vinegar apologizes. The rulebook includes a paragraph that describes how to tell whether a liquid is comfortable with itself. The paragraph must have been written by a poet, seconded to the customs office after a small scandal involving adjectives. One night the city stages an experiment. We shall call it the Great Test, capital letters included. A large hall is chosen. Citizens are invited to bring their ring charms, their spoons, their purple stones, their powders that insist they can charm evil out of a soup. The civic physician, 3 skeptical tailors, and a 12-year-old who won a prize for common sense oversee the proceedings. Wines are poured, labeled only with letters. The totems do their dance. Some rings blush near every cup. Some refuse to be frightened by anything. The 12-year-old, employing the radical method of smelling and taking very small sips, identifies the cup with the suspicious bitterness. Everyone is impressed and slightly irritated. A new ordinance is passed that more or less says, "We will continue to allow charms for cultural reasons, but we will also teach children how to taste." The city is learning. Slowly that education is a form of antidote. Does that end the fear? Of course not. Fear is industrious. It files appeals in triplicate. A poet writes a satire in which a man tries to poison his enemy by shouting "poison" whenever the enemy lifts a cup and the enemy dies of thirst. The satire circulates, and the council pretends not to read it. The reality is less tidy. Sometimes people die because food goes bad, and sometimes people die because their bodies are tired of being brave, and sometimes people die because someone else wanted them to. The law's job is not to sort these with perfection, but to prevent the worst ideas from feeling convenient. Rules are roadblocks against temptation advertised as safety. In a great city, you sometimes meet the physician who is more philosopher than doctor. He writes little treatises that remind princes that a healthy court can digest jokes, and that laughter is the quickest antidote to pride. He prescribes small doses of ridicule for symptoms of grandiosity. "If a ruler cannot bear to be teased about his hat," he writes, "he will drink the sort of wine that must be tested by 6 men with perfect families." His patients improve when they are allowed to eat with people who do not count the sips. A law is drafted that encourages nobles to invite one reasonable person without a title to supper each week. The law passes, accomplishes nothing visible, and remains on the books as evidence that someone tried to legislate humility. Do you hear that thin metallic sound? That is the clink of a key turning in a door that leads to a small room where a large decision sleeps. Palaces keep such rooms for emergencies and for the appearance of emergencies. In them live antidotes, labeled in a handwriting that looks like diplomacy, and powders so bitter they must be heroic to swallow. Also in them live records, who ordered what, when, and for whom. The logbook is the palace's conscience. It has blank pages waiting for nights when fear decides to host a party. The cupbearer knows this room. He knows which shelf is sincere and which shelf is ceremonial. On bad nights he visits both and leaves with a steadying breath. Consider the banquet again. It is a theatre of safety upon a stage set for prestige. The table is a geography of alliances. Who sits where tells a story about who can reach whose plate. Centerpieces are tall because tall centerpieces are fashionable, and also because they let people pretend not to be looking at one another's hands. Knives shine and perform innocence. A musician plays a tune with the exact number of notes required to fill the tense spaces between courses. When dessert appears, the air changes, as if sugar grants courage. People gossip a little more like themselves. The cupbearer relaxes by the width of a thumbnail. This is when a mishap is most likely, not because of malice, but because relaxation is a form of blindness. The good law tries to account for this by requiring that the kitchen extinguish its most ambitious candles after the main course. Dessert by twilight becomes a rule, and poets flock to praise it for reasons that have nothing to do with safety and everything to do with rhyme. Huge houses create small men and women whose lives are the size of a service corridor. Among them is a girl who delivers linen to the rooms where linen loses hope. She has a gift. She notices when objects are trying to pretend they were always where she finds them. One afternoon she observes that a certain bottle on a certain shelf has turned its label toward the wall as if ashamed. She tells the understeward, who tells a cousin, who tells a trustworthy somebody, and within an hour the cupbearer is holding the bottle to the light, speaking to it like a disappointed teacher. The label says rose water, and the liquid says, "Let us not be roses tonight." The incident ends with lots of authoritative nodding and a rule about labels that must not look away from the room. The girl gets a small coin, and more importantly, a bigger sense of what her eyes can do. The city, without writing it down, promotes a new inspector, the gaze of those who usually go unnoticed. Let's cross the border between policy and ritual, where the laws are written not in ink, but in choreography. A prince drinks first from a certain kind of cup at certain festivals. The act is described as sharing the cup with the people, which is a beautiful way to engineer the illusion that a small circle is a large one. In reality, the cup is unique, guarded, blessed, and supervised more fervently than some cousins. The taste is brief. The gesture is long. Most people see the performance and feel safer. A few see the performance and feel distanced, because safety has been turned into a spectacle they cannot touch. The law cannot fix this because no law can transform a theater back into a kitchen. What it can do is fund kitchens. Sometimes it does. Craftsmen capitalize on anxiety with an ingenuity that is almost a public service. A goldsmith offers chains with tiny lockets designed to hold just a size worth of antidote. The lockets are beautiful in a way that makes practical people suspicious. An ordinance declares that such lockets must be stamped by the guild with the year and the initials of an inspector who has licked the locket to ensure it is not made of disappointment. This seems excessive, until one remembers that counterfeiting safety is a highly marketable crime. The penalty is a fine calculated by a formula involving the price of cloves and the number of tears provoked by the deception. The formula is mocked by everyone until it works, and then it is copied by neighboring cities with a note that says, "Inspired by our clever friends across the river." For a few months one year, the city goes through a passion for glass balls that cloud over in the presence of wickedness. Wickedness obligingly proves to be present almost everywhere, which is bad news for cloudless skies and good news for vendors of explanations. The council convenes experts. A glazier with honest eyebrows admits that the balls cloud when held in warm hands, because warmth invites fog. The city imagines outlawing warm hands. It does not. Instead, it outlaws declaring fog a verdict. The high. Balls retreat to mantelpieces, where they perform the acceptable miracle of being pretty. A related law encourages households to keep a bowl of plain water and a saucer with salt, for those who wish to feel prepared at supper without spending the rent on theatrics. The water and salt do nothing dramatic. They might help with spills and conversation. We are almost to the end of this corridor, where the air thins into resolve. First, a detour to the library of the physician-philosopher, which smells like ideas toasted over a slow fire. He writes a line I like. Most antidotes require time and honesty. Both can be administered at table. He means that distrust digests better when named aloud, and that a dinner in which ordinary people are allowed to ask sincere questions tends to end with fewer accusations. Inspired, the council creates a modest feast called the Open Table, hosted monthly at the town hall. Bread, soup, and talk. The rules state, no one shall speak louder than the soup. The event is, against all odds, successful enough to become a tradition. It is difficult to poison a meal that announces itself as an antidote to loneliness. Now the last room, small, bare, stolid, smelling faintly of ink and resolve. It is the office of the master of the city watch. He keeps on his shelf 2 helmets, one polished and public, the other scuffed and private. He also keeps a jar of charcoal and 3 lists. The first list names merchants who have enemies. The second names enemies who prefer paperwork to knives. The third names households where fear sleeps badly and wakes everyone up. He reads the lists as a doctor reads pulses. When panic spikes, he sends watchmen not to the gates but to the kitchens, because kitchens are where fear likes to boil. When the rumour runs, he shortens its legs by walking the market himself and buying whatever the rumour says is dangerous. He eats, smiles, and refuses to die on schedule. His method is not perfect. It is very good theatre. The city sleeps on nights when his performance finds its audience. Let us step back outside. The stars are busy and so are the cats. Somewhere a nightjar practices being a nightjar with rare excellence. We have learned that poison is not only a substance, it is a narrative, a story about power that travels in tiny vessels. The law can chase the vessels and sometimes empty them. What the law cannot do is keep people from wanting stories in which danger makes them interesting. For that you need poets, bakers, decent soups, and a laughter that knows how to land softly. The city will continue to regulate jars and seals and tastes and spoons and sleeves. It will continue to stamp lockets and test glass and hire cupbearers with small, steady hands. It will continue to be wrong in colourful ways and right in ordinary ones. As we close this section, tuck in the images on your mental shelf next to the pig and the inspector's weights. A candle that burns like a clerk. A cup that asks for attention. An apothecary's caution shelf that prefers euphemism to confession. A kitchen that ties its sleeves into order. A boy whose cough nearly rewrote a law. A rooster freed by a footnote. A monarch who performs control with a sip, measured to reassure. A fair experiment chaperoned by a child with common sense. A girl promoted by her eyes. A goldsmith licking a locket because the law told him to. Glass balls retiring from wickedness in favor of weather. A watchmaster who buys rumors a sandwich and then eats it in public. And a city that tries to be brave by writing down how to be careful. Sleep, for now, with that in mind. The night is patient. We will need patience, too, for the next hall, the place where loyalty is forged into metal and carried by men who swear oaths with both hands on the past. Hello again, traveller. Slide the pillow a little closer to your ear. The night is about to pick up a heavier instrument. We have wandered through rules that giggle and jars that pretend not to contain suspicion. Now we turn down a corridor lined with stone and intention, where the lantern light gets caught on iron, and the air remembers ceremonies that prefer not to blink. Breathe in, breathe out. The heart should not race here, even if the walk feels taller. This is the place where loyalty is forged into a visible thing and taught to walk beside power without drooling. Here men with foreign vowels carry axes like punctuation marks, and the palace measures trust by how well its echoes hold still. Names first, gently. Some call them the Varangians, some call them the Axemen, some call them the Guardians who arrived from colder maps. Their hair is a geography lesson. Their shoulders are a translation you can understand in any language. They came by rivers and bargains, by oaths taken in rooms that smelled of salt and bargaining. The empire hired them because distance can be a kind of honesty. A man who does not have cousins in the local senate is less likely to be bribed with a smile. A man who takes his pay in heavy coin rather than airy favors is less likely to forget which door he guards. That is the theory, and the empire loves theories as much as it loves curtains. Picture the corridor, stone polished by polite boots and urgent knights. On the walls hang tapestries that translate power into thread, emperors standing beside metaphors, saints elbowing stars, ships that sail on seas woven by patient fingers who knew the sea mostly through gossip. Between the tapestries are niches with lamps that burn with identical flames, because identical flames comfort palaces. And there the sound you came for, boots that do not hurry. The Varangians walk like clocks that learn to have legs. Their axes rest against their shoulders, the way commas rest inside solutions. The blades are wide, the hafts are long, and the polish is devotional. You could see your future in those blades if the present allowed such liberties. The oath that keeps these men tidy is not a paragraph. It is choreography. They swear with one hand on the book that teaches heaven to read, and the other on the handle that persuades doors to be reasonable. The gesture matters because it binds two jurisdictions, the invisible authority that hears promises and the very visible authority that enforces seating arrangements. Witnesses attend. The scribe copies the words with care because words that hold axes should not wobble. There is a little humor at the edges because the best oaths include humility. You will not strike a man for sneezing, says one line. You will not sneeze as an excuse to strike a man, suggests another, written in a smaller hand by someone with experience. Oaths are a technology of memory. They allow the future to be present at the moment when someone lifts a weapon. A palace is a machine for producing ceremony out of fear. The Varangians are the part of the machine that glows in candlelight. They guard thresholds, which are where meaning lives. Doors are metaphors that charge rent. Whoever controls the door decides which stories are allowed to continue and which must begin again elsewhere. An axe near a door says, "Do not attempt to argue with wood tonight." An axe across a chest says, "This conversation will be conducted at the volume of permission." And yet, for all the menace, the men are bored in the way professionals become bored. Alertly, respectfully, with the skill of making boredom appear dignified. Boredom is a kind of peace that knows how easily it could turn into work. Listen to the drill they practice when the emperor decides to be a verb and move from one room to another. It is called a translation because power enjoys being poetry. First, the corridor is cleared by looks. Then the axes tilt in a quiet bow that suggests steel has manners. The captain, who speaks 3 languages and 1 dialect of silence, raises a hand. Boots hum in unison on stone, and the procession squares itself into a phrase that means, "We are not surprised by anything, including our own excellence." Servants recede into the scenery like afterthoughts with brooms. Courtiers pretend to be part of the architecture. The emperor appears inside a cage of ritual so invisible that people think they are simply watching a man walk. This is the trick, to convince danger that it is a guest who arrived early and will be seated later. The axes are not only weapons. They are punctuation that keeps sentences from becoming riots. In a world of daggers that hide in sleeves and whispers that wear perfume, the honest visibility of an axe is almost merciful. A dagger is a maybe, an axe is a statement. If something unfortunate happens, the blade says in its excellent grammar, there will be no ambiguity about where the consequences came from. This removes a certain amount of improvisational energy from the room and replaces it with a policy. People stand straighter when punctuation is present. Even the chandeliers consent to behave as if they were disciplined constellations. Let us meet one guard, because abstractions sleep better when they are personalized. Call him Arn, because he answered to something like that once beside a river, where the fish negotiated with the sunlight. Arn learned early that hands are ambassadors. His left hand learned to anchor a shield. His right learned to write its opinions with an axe. Later, in calmer weather, his right hand learned to pour a cup without making the wine anxious. He is tall in multiple countries. He speaks the palace language in a practical tense and laughs in a dialect that sounds like Thor. He came because he was told that gold in this city is honest when counted, and that justice here has an address. He stays because the work makes sense to his bones. Also because he has discovered oranges. Arn's day is a schedule of rooms. He knows the corridor that smells like beeswax and control. He knows the corner where drafts are most theatrical. He knows the exact distance from the emperor's shoulder to the nearest thing that might become a problem. He trains with the others in a courtyard designed for usefulness, not applause. The captain drills them on the 4 emergencies: the sudden noise, the sudden heat, the sudden messenger, and the sudden person who was not supposed to exist. Each emergency has a choreography. "Noise is a thief," says the captain. "Retrieve the silence first. The truth will follow it." They practice placing their bodies in space, as if they are commas moving inside a long sentence about survival. There are rituals even on sleepy days. In the morning, a row of blades catches the sun and complains politely about fingerprints. The men oil the steel with a tenderness that would surprise anyone who thinks tenderness is a luxury of peace. Steel likes attention. It behaves better when noticed. They inspect the edges not because they expect to use them, but because readiness is a lullaby they sing to their own nerves. At midday they eat. The meal is hearty and brown, and accompanied by a fraction of wine precise enough to count. In the evening, one of the older guards tells a story about a winter so cold the coffee envied the ice, and the young ones laugh at the idea of coffee while memorizing the lesson hidden in the joke. The lesson is always the same. Don't get clever with sleep in a palace. Sleep will take it personally. Not every corridor is inward. Sometimes the axes breathe exterior air. Festivals require the palace to pretend it is a town square, and towns require the square to pretend it is a festival. The Varangians become a frame that holds the painting steady while it is being admired by the weather. Children point at the blades with the wholesome awe of people who have not yet met bureaucracy. Mothers disapprove in quiet tones, measured for the ears of husbands who were never going to buy axes anyway. Street sellers calculate how many roasted chestnuts a smile from a guard is worth, and decide the number is 1 for the smile, 2 for the story later. The guards do not scowl. They have faces trained to become walls with good manners. Inside the wall they are thinking about soup and songs, and whether the shoemaker kept his promise about fixing a left boot that was convinced it was right. Formality, like weather, produces exceptions. There are nights when the emperor attends a service in a chapel where the icons are so patient that time tries to imitate them. The corridor cannot accompany him there, so the axes wait at the edge of the holy and stare at their reflections in humility. A young eunuch, curious about the men who measure rooms with shoulders, asks Arn to describe snow. Arn considers. "Snow," he says, "is silence that forgot it was supposed to stay invisible." The eunuch nods as if someone has gently rearranged his idea of cold. You see, the axes guard more than doors. They guard metaphors so that people can sleep under them without getting wet. Let us not pretend the work is purely decorative. There are fast days for laughter. Once a messenger arrived with speed that embarrassed his sandals, and news sharp enough to slice the appetite off a banquet. A cousin had taken it upon himself to discover whether ambition could be smuggled in under the soup. The cousin failed in a way that made noise. Axes moved. There was a short moment, when time narrowed to a straw and everyone drank their next seconds through it. When the moment unclenched, the cousin had learned that palaces are environments where cause and effect keep their appointments. The law wrote 3 paragraphs about it for later digestion. The axes returned to their customary occupation of being admired politely by lamps. Between emergencies, the guard performs maintenance on trust. Arn escorts letters sealed with wax that has been introduced to a particular ring. He stands outside doors while conversations decide which truth they will invite to stay for supper. He watches faces in the quiet way shepherds watch weather. He learns to distinguish the clink of a nervous cup from the clink of a careless one. He notes which servants move like people who know where flour grows, and which move like cats who prefer rooms with secrets. He does not arrest anyone for being a cat. He is paid to notice. The arresting is a separate department. The separation is healthy. If every notice were a handcuff, the palace would suffocate on its own attention. The empire, being fond of metaphors you can trip over, occasionally stages pageants that summarize itself. On such days, the Varangians march in a way that reassures accountants and thrills poets. Their axes gleam like well-behaved lightning. Their formation is a sentence with no grammatical errors. Crowds feel the baseline of discipline in their ribs and go home resolved to be better at chairs. A philosopher who disapproves of all parades nevertheless admits that a visible promise has been made. As long as these men can walk in a straight line, our lines on paper may be believed. He puts it in a letter that no one reads until decades later, when paper needs something to be proud of. There are customs that the city never writes down, because writing them down would make them self-conscious. One is the rule of the night stare. If an imperial person must ascend while shadows are trying to prove they own geometry, the guard walks 2 steps behind and 1 to the side, the better to prevent the sort of fall that turns into a rumor faster than you can say slippery. Another is the courtesy of the threshold pause. The guard holds the door not because doors are heavy, but because choices are. A pause gives choices a chance to cooperate before they are enacted. These seem small. Small is where safety enjoys living. Large safety is for statues. Small safety is for human beings with shins. A palace's memory is built from objects that do not leave. The axes are some of those objects. So are the seals and the tapestries and the steps worn into a preference by loyal feet. Anne develops an affection for a particular stone halfway down a certain hall. He cannot explain it except to say that the stone has balanced many situations with grace. On the day he finally rests his hand on it, the stone is pleasantly cool and gives nothing away. Loyalty is like that stone, present, polite, not theatrical, until the exact moment when a body needs something reliable to lean on. We should talk about the money, because coin has a way of telling you the truth while pretending to be shiny. The Varangians are paid in sums that satisfy men who keep honest counts. Part is coin, part is privilege. A meaningful part is the promise that when the service ends, no bureaucrat will suddenly discover a clerical mistake large enough to feed a family of sharks. The empire is proud of honoring contracts with foreigners because foreigners write songs about such things, and songs are international law in taverns. When the pay is late, which happens on calendar pages that smell like war, the captain visits the treasury with the kind of smile that keeps it from developing new doors. An arrangement is made. Hunger is unromantic in people hired to make romance stand back. Not all loyalties are upward. The men are loyal sideways to each other in the way of soldiers who were children once without knowing it. They remember who twisted an ankle on the wet step near the kitchens and who sang badly but without hesitation. They keep a small fund collected from coins that prefer to be useful. It pays for candles when a man's mother dies far away in a village that spells grief with wind. The fund also pays for repairs to a favorite bench in a courtyard where friendships survive bureaucracy. If you wish to know whether an institution is tolerable, ask about its bench repairs. The number tells you how much sitting together is considered a pillar of policy. There is doctrine about not interfering in politics. It is less hypocritical than it sounds. An axe that chooses becomes a knife. The captain says this to the new men on afternoons that smell like rain. We are here to protect the process by which choices are manifested, he says, not to pre-chew them. The metaphor is not delicious, but it is nutritious. The men nod. They will be accused anyway of leaning this way or that. The accusation is a seasonal crop in palaces. It flourishes regardless of watering. The Varangians cultivate a garden of shrugs that nevertheless keep doors safely shut. Everyone needs a specialty. Stories travel. Fishermen tell stories about how a foreign guard bought fish with such respectful seriousness that even the eel felt consulted. A washerwoman tells a story about how an axe held open a door for a woman carrying too much laundry, and how the woman was grateful enough to consider forgiving the emperor for taxes while she walked down the stairs. These are little legends that glue big ones together. Empires do not run on decrees alone. They run on the small ways force remembers its manners. When force forgets, decrees develop a limp that courtiers will not mention if they wish to keep their nice indoor jobs. Sometimes the loyalty runs into a wall built of destiny and asks politely to pass. History has its own agenda, stamped on coins and revised at banquets. An emperor grows unpopular with people who write things down and with people who swing things. On a certain day, the palace changes bosses in a way that requires music later to explain. Where are the Varangians in that story? In different places, depending on the year. Sometimes they hold the door while history walks through with an apology. Sometimes they make sure no one bumps into history and drops it. If it sounds vague, that is because specifics are noisy. What stays true is the oath and its twin responsibilities. Do not let the book be thrown away. Do not let the handle be forgotten. The double grip prevents things from getting silly in the worst ways. Arn grows older. His shoulders stay reliable. His hair consults a lighter color. He teaches the new men how to be visible without being the point. Your job is to let the emperor be the most interesting thing in the room, he says. Unless the room decides to be interesting in a way that involves the emperor's blood, then your job is to be an abrupt revision. He shows them the trick of listening with your face calm and your attention adventurous. He demonstrates how to speak to a frightened clerk so that the clerk remembers how doors work. He takes them to the bench in the courtyard and tells them about the stone in the hall that has supported 10,000 decisions and never asked to be thanked. Be that stone, he says. You will be stepped on. That is how you learn intimacy with footwear. It is also how you become necessary. What does the city see when it looks at these men? Sometimes it sees foreigners paid to make domestic errors expensive. Sometimes it sees a spectacle of straight lines that reassures anyone who has ever tried to get children into shoes. Sometimes it sees a contradiction, that freedom is guarded by people who stand still. The city is not wrong. Contradictions are part of the fabric. A baker cannot be both open and closed. A guard cannot be both soft and sharp. So the city asks for a plausible combination. Be sharp and gentle. Be soft and ready. The Varangians answer with posture. Posture is how bodies write promises without bothering paper. The chapel lamps burn lower. The captain writes a letter to a friend in a northern town that smells of fish and long patience. In it, he describes the job as teaching geometry to air. The line is pretentious and also true. He folds the letter and seals it with a press that has learned a lot about wax. Arn finishes his rounds and puts his palm on the favorite stone, because rituals keep men honest with themselves. Somewhere a child dreams of an axe that sings. Somewhere a scholar dreams of an argument that ends with everyone agreeing to go to bed. The palace sighs the way big buildings sigh when they remember foundations are old and roofs are vain. The night does not hurry. Before we leave the corridor, let us put a few things on the shelf where we keep images for sleeping. A row of blades reflecting identical flames. A book and a handle held at the same time. A captain who speaks dialects of silence. A translation procession where boots make grammar on stone. A door that decided to be a metaphor and then had to live with the responsibilities. A boy eunuch learning about snow as visible silence. A cousin who discovered causality the expensive way. A bench that survives institutions. A stone that lends its coolness to decisions. Pay counted honestly because songs remember. A rooster somewhere, spared from late experiments by a wise law. And Arn, who became a comma so the sentence could continue without tripping. Yes, the axes glitter. Yes, the oaths weigh more than paper. Yes, the corridor is a theater with a better script than most. And still underneath the lesson is homely, that loyalty is most useful when it is boring, that safety is a craft learned by repetition, that dignity, when authentic, is simply kindness standing up straight. If you can sleep with that, if your lids can lower with the knowledge that somewhere men are rehearsing steadiness so that your dreams may be allowed to loiter, then the corridor has done its job. The next stretch of night will ask us to look outward again, to the places where the empire polishes its armor in public and tells the world a story about itself that gleams loudly. But let us lie here for a moment longer, listening to the soft clink of discipline settling like well-stacked spoons into tomorrow. Hello again, traveler. We've strolled the comic alleys of rules, sipped the careful theatre of cups, and measured corridors with the steady grammar of axes. Now we step out beneath banners, cloth stories that flutter even when their sentences are confused. This is the quarter where glory is lacquered onto wood that creaks, where the official portrait borrows its light from a window that opens onto dust. The lantern is comfortable in your hand. It knows we are not here to argue with monuments. We are here to listen while the wind revises inscriptions, and to smile kindly at the places where polish and mud take turns being true. Take a breath as slow as a procession that forgot its hurry. In and out. Good. Tonight is about image, the deliberate arrangement of light around power, and about reality which keeps showing up in inconvenient boots. We will not contest the grand words. We will set them beside the small ones and let them become neighbors. Neighbors learn each other's habits. Even the loud ones eventually develop a talent for whispering. Begin with a square full of trumpets. Paper confetti falls from balconies like repentant snow. In the center, a dais, tall enough to place a person above weather, short enough to be photogenic from ground level. A standard is raised. Lions glare, crosses shine. Latin verbs flex for the crowd. A herald lists victories in a voice that could hammer nails. Meanwhile, over by the fountain, a boy counts pigeons and decides the number of victories depends on whether the pigeons are included. That is the arithmetic of witness. The boy is not a cynic. He simply knows how many feathers fit on a statue's head. He is making his own list, and it includes the trumpet that dropped a note, and the soldier who smiled at a child, and the woman who caught a falling banner with a calm that deserves a medal of its own. There is a kind of shine that happens to ideas when they are worn in public. The First and Second Crusades, choose your century and your sermon, knew how to dress. Cloaks, crests, relics that persuaded people to stand taller, and stories that later learned to glow in manuscripts. The roads that led east were mapped not just by rivers and ranges, but by intentions, to prove devotion, to settle debts with heaven, to earn adventure, to earn a pardon from sins that preferred to stay, to sell salt or buy saffron, to escape a neighbor's envy, to join friends, to find God, to be seen. The shine comes from the part of the intention that looks good in daylight. The mud remembers the rest. You can honor both without letting either pretend to be everything. Listen to a sermon before departure. The preacher is a specialist in verbs like restore, reclaim, and redeem, which are verbs that bring furniture back into a room and then ask to be thanked for it. He holds up a cross that would prefer to be quiet about its schedule. He quotes stories about bravery that refuse to mention the price of boots. He lists sins like a grocer itemizing apples, and then uses forgiveness like a scale. The congregation exhales relief. Forgiveness is a magnificent invention. It makes new mornings possible. But you can hear the textile merchants in the back calculating windfall deadlines. You can hear the young men in the front calculating songs. Shine is not a lie. It is a selective truth with excellent lighting. The city equips the shining with practicalities that squeak. Rules for musters, rules for loans, rules for who gets to be a hero on which day, if two heroes arrive at the same intersection. A committee argues lovingly about the official shade of righteous red for banners. A compromise is reached, the red of dawn that is serious about being red. Armorers negotiate payment in coin versus promises. Coin insists on being counted. Promises insist on being admired. A law requires that horses be blessed and shoed. The blessing is to remind men of perspectives. The shoeing is to remind horses that stones are personal. Everything is arranged to look inevitable from the right angle. Inevitability is a costume that fits poorly, but photographs beautifully. Meet a young man, call him Matteo, because there are always Matteos when drums are generous. He is not an abstraction. He is a pair of hands that have learned rope and bread, and the way to untie worry from his mother's eyes with a joke. Matteo is moved by music, and by the idea of being the sort of person histories remember with a paragraph that includes the word steadfast. He touches the hilt of a sword he cannot quite afford and feels taller. He also owns a pair of boots that have complicated opinions about rocks. He hears the sermon and believes half of it with his chest and half of it with his eyebrows. He tells himself that the halves add up to faith. He is not wrong. Faith is an arithmetic that gracefully accepts remainders. The departure season arrives with banners that smell like dye and dew. People line the streets with a generosity that always surprises the streets. Coins are tossed, blessings given, bread broken in the dramatic way bread likes to be broken when it will not be eaten by the people breaking it. The procession flows like a river that has learned choreography. Drums point time in a direction. Flags teach wind to read. Matteo's mother does not look at him directly. She looks at the place in the air where he will be in 5 minutes. Fathers press hands until hands remember. A child asks whether the horses know where holy is. No one wants to answer, so the horses answer by being horses, patient with noise, skeptical of confetti, and honest about their fears of puddles. The road east is longer than a map folding. Pilgrims, merchants, mercenaries, clerics, farmers with swords that miss having plows, minstrels who have memorized which tunes soothe which campfires. Languages bump into one another and steal nouns politely. Marketplaces tilt to accommodate new appetites. Money learns the names of its cousins. The shine of the city's send-off travels with the column for 1 day, then 2, then fades into something less photogenic and more faithful. Blisters, bargaining, shared jokes that begin with, "Today my martyrdom is socks." A chronicler writes about the great purpose with ink. The common talk is about soup. Soup advances civilization because it remembers people are containers. Purposes leak without it. There are gates that open only for stories. Antioch, Acre, and cities whose names time rescored for easier humming. Each requires a tale at the threshold. The official story is conquest or covenant, depending on who is singing. The unofficial story is the negotiation of shadows, who gets to stand where while saying, "Thus." Shine helps in both varieties. A gilded banner distracts attention from the arithmetic of ladders. A relic lends confidence to knees that prefer to bend only for familiar reasons. In the thick of it, Matteo discovers that bravery is easier sideways, done for the person next to you, than forward into an idea. He becomes excellent at sideways, which is the most underrated direction in heroism. Where, you ask gently, is the mud? It is exactly where you think, and also where you don't. In the markets that adapt to conquest before the conquered, learn how to pronounce the new prices. In the alleys where zeal turns into chores and then turns, if not supervised, into boredom with a helmet. In the letters home that mention glory in the first paragraph, logistics in the second, and a request for socks in the third that is more pious than it knows. In the way victory and defeat both need to be fed, and both prefer bread more than slogans. Mud is not evil. Mud is the part of truth that refuses to shine because it is busy holding footprints together. Thank it. Without mud, history would be a pamphlet that forgot to include people. The bureaucrats, bless them, travel slower, but last longer. They arrive with ledgers after the drums and leave with ledgers before the poems. They invent stamps that certify that this piece of holiness is genuinely authorized by the Department of Holiness, and that this barrel of oil is only oil, no matter what the barrel thinks at night. The Crusader states, the phrase tastes of map and assertion require laws that do not fall over in wind. Some laws are wise. Share wells. Some are precise. Mills shall not sleep near monasteries. Some are out of their depth and cling to wording like a poor swimmer clings to reeds. Shine venerates the crown. Mud negotiates whose roof gets repaired first after a storm whose moral was unclear. The governor smiles for visiting dignitaries and frowns for carpenters who wish to be paid in something that is not a visit. A garrison becomes a village with extra metal. Children learn to play at sieges the way other children play at weddings, which says more about human rehearsal than about politics. Priests officiate disputes about chickens with the same gravity reserved for betrothals, because chickens and betrothals both test community. Matteo, who has learned sideways bravery, also learns the soft miracles: how to repair a sandal, how to apologize to a stranger in 3 languages, how to explain to an angry man that his anger is precise, but his target is not, how to carry water without spilling or glorying in not spilling. He begins to understand that the halo around grand causes is lit, 1 cup at a time. He sleeps better on nights when he lights his own candle and expects nothing from it but light. There are battles. They are loud. They make men 50 years old by the afternoon. There are scuffles that feel like smaller words for the same old sentence. There are truces that are wiser than the people who sign them, and truces that are pious lies dressed for guests. None of this is news to empires or to goats. What feels worth keeping is the image of a banner that refuses to argue with wind. The flag does not defeat gusts, it converses with them. So too the city's myths at home converse with the tedium of supply coins and wagon axles. The myth says, "We are the shining." The axle says, "We are the turning." The wagon moves only when both are permitted to be right. We return, home for a moment, because home is where shine is minted and where mud is evaluated. The city welcomes news with a hunger that is never on a diet. Victories are paraded in sequences that go well with bread. Losses are choreographed into lessons so that suffering turns into something you can hang on a wall without upsetting dinner. The chronicle glosses certain oversights. The ballad is less merciful and therefore more sustainable. The ballad remembers names that the chronicle spells as various. The cathedral hangs a trophy in a place where it will be seen by people looking for comfort. Our guild adds a rule requiring contributions to a fund for widows that also purchases very striking candles. Shine funds candlelight. Mud is where the wax falls. We need both to read by evening. A relic returns, perhaps real, perhaps true in the way that salads are healthy. People line up to touch the reliquary, which is a box that contains a smaller box that contains a story, that contains a fragment of something that makes the story tremble. Touching it is a way to organize desire and gratitude. A skeptical carpenter bows anyway. He knows wood and knows that belief sometimes needs a hinge. A woman who has lost 2 sons to righteousness touches the box with forgiveness she does not owe, and is applauded by angels who specialize in etiquette. The law, not foolish for once, requires a rotation schedule for handlers, so no single person becomes too important to the box. Bureaucracy here guards humility, the way axes guard thresholds. If you smile at that, you are beginning to see the city as it sees itself, a choreography of protections for things that matter, and for people who will mess those things up without help. Propaganda develops calluses with use. Artists are hired to paint the story at a flattering angle. They do because painting the rent is as respectable as painting saints. Yet even the flatterers cannot resist the truth's habit of photobombing. In the corner of a triumphal panel, look, there is a man drinking water too fast, and his neighbor patting his back with concern. Between 2 victorious spears, a child peeks with the curiosity that defeats drama. On a shield, polished to reflect only heaven, a smudge insists on being earthly. Generations later, we will thank these smudges for reminding us that glory which refuses to share space with sweat is a poster, not a memory. A pilgrim arrives who never left. She is old, with hands that remember milking and mourning. She has walked a circle inside the city for 40 years, tracing stations of a journey that geography thinks large and her feet think local. People call her foolish and then ask her to pray for them. She wraps prayers like bread, modest and sustaining. She knows more about the Crusades than most generals. Her knowledge is shaped like kitchens. She confides to you because you are kind that what keeps a city faithful is not banners, but benches where strangers stop being. She approves of the benches near the soup cellar on Dove Lane and disapproves of the benches the new magistrate installed that are too elegant for a tired body to sit on without remembering who it used to be. Her doctrines are practical, which is to say, divine with pockets. We must address the critics who arrive with long knives for reputations and short attention for context. They are useful. They sand the shine. They remind the city that motives pile like apples. The good ones bruise if you handle them with speeches. They point out crusader cruelty with accurate fingers. The city blushes because blush is how truths are absorbed when denial would cost sleep. A wise ordinance appears. On feast days celebrating victories, homilies must include a paragraph of repentance read in a voice that can lift bread without scaring it. This is not the end of hypocrisy, but it is a habit that lets conscience wear shoes. What do the Varangians think those commas carved in iron from our last corridor when the city advertises its story to itself? They stand nearby on days when memory hires trumpets and remain as punctuation, even when sentences grow exuberant. Arn, you remember him, eyebrows like careful roofs, watches a parade in which a commander's speech seems allergic to the word cost. Afterward, Arn leans on his favorite stone and says to a young guard, "Glory is a fine cloak. Wear it, but check the weather." The young guard nods, partly because the advice is good, partly because nodding is the one doctrine that survives regime change without editing. Old soldiers become elderly stories. Matteo, the sideways brave, returns with boots that understand maps. He learns the profession of silence first, because telling everything to everyone makes the soup cold. Later, when his bones begin to prefer chairs that know his name, he tells smaller truths to younger ears, about the kindness of a man who shared the last orange, about the day a truce saved a child who didn't know it was famous, about the way looking at stars made him forgive a commander who didn't deserve it at noon. He does not romanticize the killing. He respects the dead by refusing to turn them into architecture. He plants beans with the same seriousness he once applied to sharpening. That is another form of crusade without the horses with better returns. You might ask what happens to myths when they retire. They open small shops. A legend sells ribbon at a stall that used to be a blacksmith's, and the ribbon remembers hammers. A saint story rents a room above a tavern and assists with the books because numbers too are pilgrimages. A famous victory becomes a proverb that children misuse with charm. A defeat that saved a village becomes the village's sense of humor. Myths do not die. They go into local politics. There they become chairs, customs, excuses for cake, and reasons to repaint doors on anniversaries of reasons. The shine is redistributed into objects that gratefully accept it. The mud becomes mortar. No one writes this down except the person who writes lullabies. Let us walk through a museum imagined, where the labels are sometimes honest. On the wall, a shield that believed itself bigger than it was, a spearhead that found an argument it couldn't finish, a chalice that auditioned for miracles and settled for being a cup that did its job politely. The label beneath the shield notes that it was part of a set, whose other members were bored to death by decades in a chest. The label beneath the spearhead admits it was found in a field later sown with parsley, and says approvingly that parsley persists. The label beneath the cup praises the goldsmith's restraint and the lips' kindness to mouths that thought they were braver than they were. Honesty is not the enemy of reverence. It is reverence taking off its parade shoes so it can walk farther. The law plays a last gentle role. It cannot adjudicate holiness, but it can regulate traffic near sacred places so that devotion does not trample ankles. It cannot measure valor, but it can require pensions to be paid without scandals large enough to feed a choir. It cannot outlaw boasting, but it can fund schools where children learn to read both banners and receipts. A city that teaches its young to thread needles and question adjectives has already located more truth than one that invests only in trumpets. Trumpets are excellent. They remind us to be awake during daylight. Receipts are humbler. They remind us to be awake when we count. Night leans in. We must begin the soft exit. But before we lower the curtain, a few more images for your shelf beside the pig, the jar, the axe, and the bench. A banner catching dawn and switching it to local time. A boy counting pigeons as a form of fact-checking. A sermon that believed verbs could move mountains, and a mule that suggested a route around. A procession that looked like water with opinions. A market where prices learned Latin by eavesdropping. A chronicler who wrote various and a ballad that refused to. A relic box with hinges that understood grief. A painting smudged by honesty. A pilgrim who never left because the city is large enough for all journeys. An ordinance that taught feast days to blush. On advising weather checks for shining cloaks. Matteo planting beans. A museum label that admired parsley. And a law that helped feet arrive at reverence without needing a trumpet to negotiate turns. What remains when the shine sleeps? People, mostly. People who feed cats and polish scales, who argue about the right red for banners and then mop afterwards, who weep at the right time and at the wrong time, and at times schedules never saw coming, who put candles in windows, not because anyone important is passing, but because the dark has a habit of forgetting it is welcome to leave. Glory is generous but cannot babysit. Myth is eloquent but forgets chores. The city survives on chores performed with dignity and on jokes told with mercy. It remembers its heroes by building benches where strangers become neighbors. This is not utopia. This is useful. Usefulness is the quiet sister of grace. As for you, traveler, you have walked 4 long rooms with me, the silly laws that were secretly love, the cup that taught fear to pass through committees, the corridor that trained loyalty to speak quietly, and this square where names are polished so they can be easier to pronounce in dreams. You have earned the softest pillow in the story. If you wish, you may leave a small comment in the guest book of sleep, your city and the hour, and then let the bells decide what time it is without consulting you. The cats are on patrol. The weights are honest. The bench has been repaired again. The candles have been briefed and are behaving. Close your eyes. Let the banners furrow themselves into ordinary cloth. Let the trumpets put their mouths away. Let the axes rest at ease against walls that don't need them tonight. Let the jars be simply herbs. The scales be simply brass, the relic be a hinge that opens and closes kindly. Let glory take off its shoes and walk like a person to the kitchen for water. Let myth hang its cloak on the peg by the door and admit with relief that it too is tired. And let the city, which loves you more than it knows how to say, hum you the same old song in the key of safe. All is well enough. The night is deep. Sleep is permitted,